Tēnā koutou I hono mai nei. Tēnā koutou I roto I ngā tini āhuatanga o te wā. Ko Tuhourangi tēnei e mihi ana. E tangi ana mo ngā mate huhua o ngā marae o tātou. Huri atu te pō, nau mai te ao. He uri tēnei no te waka o te arawa, ko Tuhourangi te iwi, ko Ngāti Whakaue te iwi. He hononga no tāku ki te awa tupua o whanganui I te puaki au ki reira, I raro I te maru o Ngāti Kirikowhai, ko Kirikowhai Mikaere tōku ingoa. It's my real privilege to be here today, and thank you, Hinerangi, for the lovely intro. And I want to mihi to Kara and to Te Rau Hihiri for the opportunity to come and share some whakaaro today. I caught just the end of Lee's kōrero, and it was really very inspiring. So I want to caveat my kōrero by saying that the challenge put to me was to bring some real talk to the kōrero today. And so that is the lens that I've brought to my presentation. Just to give a little bit of context and background to my mahi. So probably well over a decade now, I worked in the public sector as a mathematical statistician, as a senior statistical analyst, as a private secretary statistics, and then as a senior advisor across the government official statistics system for probably nearly 10 years. For the last 10 years, though, I have been working in my own business, Te Wehi Development by Design, and primarily working with our Māori communities and businesses, our iwi and hapu and marae, using the skills that I have acquired to help make, I guess, informed decisions from an evidence base. More recently, as Hinerangi inferred, I have been undertaking a few different governance roles for my iwi, and then also I lead the technicians to the Data Iwi Leadership Group and Te Kāhui Raronga under the National Iwi Chairs Forum. I'm going to try to move my slides along. They don't seem to be moving. Oh, honey. So I'll talk a little bit about mana ōrite relationship agreements, and then I thought I'd focus primarily on some of the challenges and learnings and provide some insight around that, and then also what my future aspirations are in regards to the mahi that we all do in this space. We have mana ōrite relationship agreements intentionally with two government departments at the moment, and they sort of are our step towards Māori data sovereignty. We have a signed mana ōrite relationship with Statistics New Zealand, and primarily in respect of their role as the Chief Government Data Steward and the Government Statistician for the Government Data System. And then also we have a mana ōrite relationship agreement with DIA, and intentionally again in terms of their role as the Government Chief Digital Officer, and so in charge of digital, I guess, development across the government system. Our agreements are about embodying the intention of iwi and the Crown to establish a mana ōrite te tiriti relationship in which both parties have equal explanatory power, and I'll come back to that in the next slide. There's mutual recognition and acknowledgement of the leadership, the expertise, the mandate and commitment that both parties bring to the relationship, and te tiriti underpins our relationships. I'm not going to spend too much more on sort of the detail of those agreements. They can be found online, and I think there are other opportunities to share. But what I do want to focus in on are really in terms of the mana ōrite relationship agreements. There are two key areas that I think are fundamental in terms of those agreements. And they, I guess, if those are established, if those are understood, if those are adhered to within the relationship, then co-design, co-develop, co-deliver, and co-decide will come out of those. Just to give a little bit of background, when we first started to draft the mana ōrite relationship agreements, and they were drafted by the Data Iwi Leadership Group, they were 17 pages long, I think, when the lawyers got involved. And we culled those right down to 4 pages. And these components within those 4 pages are critical. And one is the parties have equal explanatory power, acknowledging and accepting as being equally valid to making decisions, each other's perspectives, each other's knowledge systems, and our worldviews. And that's really in recognition that we have a different knowledge system, but it should have equal mana. And with that different knowledge system, we bring a different perspective and we bring a different worldview, and they should be privileged alongside the current privilege that the Western knowledge system, perspective, and worldview has. The other really key component in terms of our mana ōrite relationship agreements are the uaratanga, or the relationship principles, that both parties honour in terms of the conduct of the relationship. In each of those different agreements, those uaratanga and relationship principles have been curated and crafted by the privileged mātauranga that we get to work with in the data space, and in particular our chairs, Rahui Papa, Che Wilson, Rikirangi Gage, Karen Verco, Wayne Wharero, Hiriwini Parata. They have all contributed to the mātauranga to select, to curate, and to translate specifically the uaratanga for the relationship in the context of data, to translate the uaratanga in terms of the relationship in the context of digital development. One of the key reasons I wanted to focus in on that is really about some of the challenges that I want to share. And there have been many, many challenges. There are many, many challenges in terms of the space that we currently occupy, the relationships that we're trying to further and establish in terms of iwi and the Crown. Some of those key relationships and the challenges to those relationships I wanted to share. So in the context of mana ōrite, I wanted to share sort of 5 key challenges. The first one is about people taking our IP and thinking nothing of it. In the beginning, we were very protective of the mana ōrite relationship agreements. We didn't share them out wider than iwi. And one of the key reasons was we didn't want people to just copy and paste and use those without understanding the context, without understanding and honouring the mātauranga that had been shared in those. And so we kept it quite locked away, and we only shared with people who came to request so we could share the learnings, the mātauranga inside. More recently, those have been published. And just 2 weeks ago, I got an agreement from a government department, which is pretty much a copy and paste of one of our mana ōrite relationship agreements, but they've stripped out the mana ōrite, they've stripped out the equal explanatory power, and they've stripped out and put generic uaratanga in there. And so really diluted the kaupapa of what we're trying to do and where we're trying to take, in particular, these titiriti relationships. We've also had instances where officials have taken the IP of some of the initiatives and innovations that we've tried to create, rather than come to us to ask how they might help us scale them up. They've just taken those and started to build those for themselves. We've also had some of the challenges and picking up on Hinerangi's point about our Te Whata data visualization platform, built by, for, and with iwi. We have copious amounts of demands, not really requests, from, in particular, officials requesting, demanding access, full access to this initiative for iwi, behind the scenes access, rather than, I guess, understanding that this is something that has been built with iwi in mind and for iwi, and not necessarily for the Crown to take over. One of the daily fights and challenges we have is value recognition. And it seems to be a constant sort of struggle to get recognition that our iwi leaders, pērai tō tātou nei rangatira nei tātaubi, they should be valued for their time, they should be valued for their expertise, And Te Ao Māori brings expertise to the table. And like everybody else, we all need to be valued and recognised for that value. One of the other challenges I'll share, and Cara did challenge me to say, we really want some real talk. So I'm just going to come with some real talk. One of the other key challenges is we constantly have to repeat ourselves because the virtue of listening doesn't seem to be something that is held up. And it is a real ability to listen. It is a real ability to listen. And it seems to be a challenge that we have every day to get people to listen, unless something goes wrong. When something goes seriously wrong, and then people are willing to listen to us. One of the other key things that I want to share in full disclosure in terms of a challenge is being constrained by the lack of trust, by the lack of innovation, and ultimately the lack of courage in terms of our relationships and our conversations with the Crown. But that then brings me to some of the learnings that I want to share and the insights from the mahi that we do. Building trusted relationships is critical, and we have invested a lot of time in the relationships that we have with Statistics New Zealand. This picture here is from, we invited the government statistician and the full leadership team to us in Rotorua, to Nuku Te Apiapi, one of our oldest whare here in Te Arawa, to discuss the expectations that we have of the relationship out of Wellington, to discuss what each of those uaratanga mean to us, and to make sure that the relationship started off from a sound base, and we were building a mutual respect. The other really key learning is reciprocity and respect goes a long way. And when you come up against, I guess, nearly weekly challenges and disagreements, having that respect and I guess a relationship of reciprocity lets you draw down on when you may disagree, but you'll decide to come back to the table to carry on in a mana ōrite way in terms of the conduct of your relationship. I did hear some of the kōrero that Henerangi and Sunny were sharing, and I think the other really key learning, particularly for me in our space of Māori data sovereignty, is people often have to hear about how innovative our mātauranga or our tupuna wisdom is from overseas or from others before they are willing to acknowledge it. And I've spoken about Māori data sovereignty and Indigenous data sovereignty all over the world. And before it really became a big kaupapa here. And then now we see here in Aotearoa, thankfully, people are more aware of the kaupapa. People, there was a budget bid around it last year. We have a minister acknowledging Māori data. And so I think if we can learn to listen and trust the wisdom that our tupuna have, trust the mātauranga that we have, we'll be able to progress things a lot faster. I wanted to share just in closing some of my future aspirations for our system, for our public sector and for Aotearoa. I have an aspiration that we have a system that works for us. I have an aspiration that we have strengthened Māori capacity and infrastructure. And I have an aspiration that we have strong Māori capability across all our priority areas of development. And then I have an aspiration that we honour our ancestors and our descendants. And because at the beginning, Henerangi said, I do like a good challenge, I wanted to leave with this wero to all of you. So my aspiration for a system that works for us comes from my wero to you all, is that a system is what a system does. And the reality is the current system ails, fails, and jails us. And so my challenge to all of you is, can we fix this system so it does work for us, or do we need to rebuild? My aspiration about strengthened Māori capacity and infrastructure, that really comes from some wonderful mahi that we did alongside Hinerangi and Atia. And one of the metaphors that we provided in the context of Māori data governance was a wakahaurua. And so the crown being one hull, te ao Māori being the other hull. The reality is, and if I be kind, we currently have waka ama at best. And so my aspiration is that the other hull is strengthened. So we strengthen that Māori capacity and infrastructure. And my wero to all of you is, how do you enable that, not inhibit it? Strong Māori capability across all our priority areas of development. That aspiration, really the wero to you is this: if you're building capability on Crown priorities, and a lot of those are issue areas, are you building capability for our nation and for the aspiration that we have for our Māori nation? Or do we need to think about a whole different pathway of building Māori capability that focuses on Māori aspirations for development? And are they different? Lastly, in terms of honouring our ancestors and our descendants, I wanted to share a whakatauaki meki from a young rangatahi that shared with me their whakaaro around their ancestors and descendants. And the whakatauki goes like this: he mokopuna ahau, nō reira me mōhio au ki taku iti. He tupuna ahau, nō reira me mōhio au ki taku rahi. I am a descendant, I am a grandchild, so I honour and know my place. But I am also an ancestor, so I shall know the legacy that I leave. Nō reira, koena tāku, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.